I stared into the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Dark circles clung beneath my eyes, and where there was once a vibrant spark, only a dull flicker remained. I used to be happy, vibrant, even. But that was before Alfred let his obsession with his failing band consume him. Before he let Emmett and me fade into the background, like distant, forgotten memories. It wasn't always this way. I could still remember the way he used to look at me when we first met, how he'd serenade me under the stars with his guitar, his voice filled with promises of a future we'd build together. I believed him then, believed in every chord, every word. But now, standing alone in this cold, lifeless house, I realized those promises had turned into echoes of a past that felt a lifetime away. After Emmett was born, everything changed. Alfred was always away, chasing dreams that never seemed to materialize, while I was left to handle everything alone, the late-night feedings, doctor appointments, and the relentless, aching loneliness. I carried it all, hoping he'd eventually see how much we needed him. But when my mother passed away, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Instead of stepping up, Alfred became even more distant, suggesting we sell my mother's apartment to fund his band's next big break. That was the final straw. I couldn't take it anymore. For Emmett's sake and my own, I had to leave. My friend Lucy had urged me to stay with her for months, and now, finally, I was ready. I packed a bag, took Emmett in my arms, and left a note on the kitchen counter. As I buckled Emmett into his car seat, a mix of fear and relief washed over me. I was finally taking control of my life again, even if it terrified me. The night was bitterly cold, and the wind howled as I drove out of the city. About an hour into the drive, the car sputtered and died. Panic gripped me as I realized I was stranded on a deserted highway with my baby in the back seat. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. The silence pressed in as Emmett's cries pierced the darkness. I honked the horn, flashed the lights, waved at the few passing cars, but no one stopped. 2 agonizing hours passed. Desperation clawed at me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Just as I was about to lose hope, headlights appeared in the distance. I leapt out of the car, waving frantically. The SUV slowed and stopped beside me. A man stepped out. Tall, with sharp features softened by kind eyes, he approached cautiously. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady and reassuring. "My car broke down. My baby, he's freezing," I stammered, barely holding back tears. He glanced past me at Emmett, then nodded. "Get your things. I'll take you wherever you need to go." His name was Simon, a businessman on his way to visit his parents in the same town where Lucy lived. As we drove, I couldn't help but spill everything, the empty promises, the heartache, the crushing loneliness. Maybe it was the warmth of his presence, or the relief of finally being safe, but the words poured out like water from a dam. Simon listened intently, his eyes reflecting an understanding that went deeper than mere politeness. "I know what it's like," he said quietly after a while. "To feel left behind. My ex left me for someone with more money. I thought I'd never move on, but life has a way of surprising us." I looked at him, surprised by the way his words echoed my own feelings. "Yeah, it does," I said softly, the tension in my chest easing just a little. As the city lights came into view, Simon hesitated. "I know this might sound crazy," he began, "but would you consider helping me out? My parents are desperate for me to settle down, and I could use a bit of breathing room. Maybe, just for a few days, you could pretend to be my girlfriend?" I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. The idea was absurd, really. But as I glanced back at Emmett, sleeping peacefully in his car seat, I realized that absurd was better than the heartbreak I'd just escaped. "All right," I said, surprising even myself. But only for a few days. The next morning, I found myself standing outside a grand, ivy-covered mansion, feeling utterly out of place. Simon had picked me up early, just as Lucy left for the airport. Emmett clung to me, his small hands gripping my sweater as I tried to steady my nerves. This wasn't just a favor anymore, It was a full-blown charade. "You ready?" Simon asked, his voice low and reassuring. He offered me a small, encouraging smile, one that warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I nodded, though my heart pounded in my chest. We walked up to the door, and the moment it opened, warmth and light enveloped me. Simon's parents, Judith and Walter, were everything I hadn't expected: kind, welcoming, and genuinely excited to meet me. Their eyes sparkled with curiosity, but there was no judgment, no skepticism. They welcomed me and Emmett with open arms, and for the first time in months, I felt at ease. "Simon has told us so much about you," Judith said as she handed me a cup of tea. "And this little one is absolutely precious." She cooed over Emmett, who giggled in response. It was hard to believe this was all an act. As the evening wore on, I found myself slipping into the role more naturally than I'd expected. Simon's parents were charming, and despite the deception, I couldn't help but enjoy their company. But what surprised me most was Simon himself. He wasn't just the stoic businessman I'd met on the side of the road. He was kind, attentive, and deeply considerate. He made sure Emmett was comfortable, asked about my life, and even joked with me about the ridiculousness of our situation. At dinner, Simon caught my eye from across the table. There was something unspoken between us, a connection neither of us had anticipated. It was in the way he smiled at me, the way he listened when I spoke, the way he looked at Emmett with a softness that I hadn't seen in Alfred for a long time. But just as I was beginning to let my guard down, the doorbell rang. I froze. Simon's parents exchanged confused glances, but Simon remained calm, excusing himself to answer the door. Moments later, he returned, his expression unreadable. "Callie," he said quietly, "there's someone here to see you." My heart dropped as I turned toward the door. There, standing in the doorway, was Alfred, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. Alfred's presence in the doorway hit me like a punch to the gut. His disheveled appearance, the dark circles under his eyes, the faint smell of alcohol, everything about him screamed of the man he'd become, not the one I once loved. Emmett stirred in my arms, sensing the tension in the air. "Callie, we need to talk," Alfred demanded, his voice low but forceful. He glanced at Simon and his parents, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. Simon stepped forward, calm but protective. "Maybe this isn't the best place for that," he suggested, his voice steady, yet the tension in the room was palpable. I stood, handing Emmett to Judith, who took him with a concerned look. "It's okay," I murmured. "I'll handle this." We stepped outside into the crisp night air. The silence between us was thick as we walked to the edge of the driveway. Alfred shoved his hands into his pockets, his jaw clenched tightly. "I've been looking for you," he said finally. "You just left. You didn't even give me a chance to fix things." "Fix things?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Alfred, you didn't even notice when they broke. You've been so wrapped up in your band, your dreams, I was invisible to you." He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I know I messed up. But I can change. I can be better, for you and Emmett." For a moment, I hesitated. This was what I'd wanted for so long, for Alfred to realize his mistakes, to come back to us. But as I stood there, I realized it wasn't enough anymore. The damage had been done. And it wasn't just about him changing, it was about me needing to move on. "I'm not coming back, Alfred," I said softly but firmly. "I found a new life, one where Emmett and I are happy. I'm not going to jeopardize that." He stared at me, shock and pain flashing in his eyes. "So that's it? You're just leaving me for some other guy?" "It's not about Simon," I replied, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me. "It's about me. I need to be with someone who values us, who's present, and who isn't just chasing a dream that's tearing us apart." Alfred stood there, lost for words. Finally, he nodded, though the hurt was evident in his eyes. "I see. I guess I've really lost you, haven't I?" I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked back inside, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. As I closed the door behind me, Simon met my gaze, his expression full of understanding. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I think I will be," I whispered. That night, as I lay in bed at Simon's parents' house, I realized that my life was no longer defined by the pain of the past. I had found a new beginning, a chance to be happy again. And as Simon held me close, I knew that this was the life I was meant to have. A year later, Emmett was running around the garden of our new home, Simon chasing after him with a wide grin. Simon's parents had embraced us both wholeheartedly, and Lucy visited often, thrilled to see me thriving. I watched them from the porch, my heart full of warmth. Life had brought me through darkness, but now, I was finally standing in the light. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of our happily ever after. If you liked this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.